All right, so the next thing that we want to explore is how do you add event listeners to our HTML elements using jQuery? Well, as you'll come to see, this is way easier than using vanilla JavaScript. And let's start by adding an event listener to our H1. So we're going to go into our index.js and we're going to, again, use jQuery by typing the $. And then we're going to wrap the thing that we're looking for, which is the H1. And now all we need to do is say .click. And that will add an event listener and call this callback function once it detects a click. So inside here, we're again going to target the H1, and then we're going to change its CSS from that horrible yellow color to maybe a slightly nicer color. Let's try purple. All right, now let's hit save and refresh. And once I click on the H1, bam, looks a lot nicer, right? Now, the other pain that we had previously is that if we wanted to add an event listener to all 5 buttons, we had to write a for loop if we only had JavaScript in our toolset. So we had to write something like for variable I equals 0, I is less than 5, I plus, and then inside the for loop, we searched through the document for query selector all to select all of the buttons. And the selector is, of course, button. And then we used this index I to add event listener. And then the event listener that we were looking for was the click listener. And then once that was detected, we call the callback function and we target the document query selector, not all, just query selector for the H1, .style, .color equals purple. All right, so this is our code without JavaScript. Just make sure that there's no typos like what I've got here. And remember that Atom is here to help. So you'll notice that the color of a function that it doesn't know about is kind of this light blue. Whereas if it knows about it, then it colors it kind of turquoisey, slightly more green. Admittedly, the difference is not large. All right, so let's fix this typo. And that changes the color highlighting. And now if I hit save and refresh, if I click on one of these buttons or any of these buttons, it will change my text to purple. Now, let me show you how much easier it is to do this using jQuery. So we're going to select our buttons by using the jQuery selector. And then we're going to say .click, just as we did before. And then we're going to bind our callback function to it. And we're going to update our H1 to change its color to purple. So you might notice that we're not bothering with a for loop here because by selecting for button, jQuery will look through your website and select all of the buttons. And if you combine that with a click method, then it will add this click listener to all the buttons that it finds without you having to go through it using a for loop. So let's delete this and hit save. And let me show you how it works exactly the same, even though our code is now a lot shorter. So aside from the click listener, we can also bind a key press event listener. So for example, if we go into our index.html and we add an input and we hit save, then you can see that we've now got a text box. Now, if we want to start detecting for keystrokes inside that text box, then we can use jQuery to do that by targeting the input and adding the key press event. And once a key press is detected, then we want to log that event inside our console. So we'll just use the console log to show us what the event.key property was. So which key got pressed. So now if I hit save and refresh, if I go in here and I type something like, I don't know, K, then you can see that we've got K showing up here. or T or D or hit enter, anything you wish. And that is how we can detect it. Now, if you wanted to do what we did in the drum kit, whereby you're adding the key press event listener to the entire document, it's as easy as either changing this to the body that we're selecting, or we can simply just delete the quotation marks and put document in here, which selects the entire document. So now, once I click inside the website, then you can see that my keystrokes are also being logged. Now, as a challenge, I want you to update the code that we wrote just now so that whenever I press a key inside our website, it gets shown inside the H1. So pause the video and see if you can complete that challenge. All right, so that shouldn't have been too difficult because all we need to do is, instead of logging the event.key, we just need to select our H1 and change its text using the text method to the event.key. And we looked at this in previous lessons where we looked at how we can manipulate text using jQuery. So if that's at all unfamiliar, then make sure that you remind yourself by going back there. All right, now let's hit save and refresh. And you can see that whenever I type anything in my keyboard, it gets shown up in the H1. So the next thing I want to show you is that instead of using .keypress or .click functions, there's actually an even more flexible way of adding an event listener. We can simply use the method on. And this takes two parameters. The first one is the event that you're looking to listen for. And that can be any of the events that we had access to by using JavaScript. So for example, let's look for something like mouse over. So we can select our H1 and we're going to detect for mouse over events. And when it does happen, then this is the second parameter, which is going to be the callback function. And when we do detect a mouse over event on our H1, then we'll change our H1's color to purple. All right, let's hit save and refresh. And now we can mouse over our H1 to change its CSS. Now, if you wanted to, you can of course also detect for click instead of mouse over. So click events, or any of the events that are listed in the MDN docs for our events for the DOM events.